leaders here in Alaska on U.S. soil in hopes of taking those first steps to the journey of peace for all the people of Ukraine who have had to live with that Russian invasion for nearly 3.5 years, that have lost 60 to 100,000 of their brave men and women. So many young men, even elderly men now fighting in Ukraine. People that were not even of fighting age anymore have come back to fight. And we've seen firsthand sort of the changing battlefield. This war has gone from trench warfare to now more foxholes and drone warfare. And Ukraine surprising the world with some of these sneak attacks with drones inside of Russia. And we should point out Ukraine, the much smaller of the two countries in every which way, landmass, population, wealth, military strength, and they have held off this Russian superpower for 3.5 years and have fought so violently. As Russia continues their aggression, a lot of people have said that this summer has been a turning point, that Vladimir Putin wanted to push more into Ukraine. He has been unable to do so. And as we've pointed out through our coverage, they have called in North Koreans. They have called in prisoners. They've let people get out of prison to go fight the war in Ukraine. They've asked North Korea for armaments as well. The war has changed a lot, not as easy as maybe Vladimir Putin had initially thought. Garrett Hake is here by my side, joining our coverage as well. Been here from the get-go. To be a fly on the wall in that bilateral meeting right now, to see what the first question asked is and what Vladimir Putin really wants. Does he want a business deal here? Is he interested in peace, or is he interested in staying in power and strengthening his military through selling foreign oil?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that this meeting only came about on the day that secondary tariffs were supposed to go into effect on Russia. Steve Witkoff was there on last Friday, which was the deadline that the president had set. President Putin then asking for this meeting. It's possible that all of this is a stalling tactic by the Russian president just to keep the conversation going, keep his opportunity to pursue that war going, as you were just outlining, Tom, a war in which he has all the traditional military advantages over a smaller neighbor. But as Keir and some of our other analysts have talked about, Russia wants back on the world stage. They want back into an opportunity to be seen as a player on par with the United States. And the president is giving it to them, at least in some extent, with these extraordinary images we've already seen, the greeting on the tarmac here, the B-2 flyover, and that drive, perhaps as long as 15 minutes. We're trying to figure out exactly where the beast went from the moment it picked up the two presidents and took them to that bilateral summit. But that opportunity, that image alone of the two presidents sitting side by side and smiling as they have a truly private conversation, Tom, something that's incredibly rare between world leaders who are close, not world leaders who are, at least on paper, adversaries.
Yeah, the president granted one one-on-one interview while he was on Air Force One on the way to Russia. We have a clip from that interview. Let's roll that now.
So what are your expectations? I mean, is the goal of this meeting in Alaska to walk away with a ceasefire?
So when you talk about deals, it's all I do. My whole life I do deals. You never know. You don't like to have too many expectations. You want it because you have to weave and bob, and you don't know what's going to happen. But we're going to go and find out. I'd like to see a ceasefire. I wouldn't be thrilled if I didn't get it, but everyone says you're not going to get the ceasefire. It'll take place on the second meeting. The second meeting is going to be but I'm not going to be happy with that. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to be, I won't be happy if I walk away without some form of a ceasefire. Now, I say this, and I've said it from the beginning, this is really setting the table today. We're going to have another meeting if things work out, which will be very soon. Or we're not going to have any more meetings at all, maybe ever.
All right, the president's saying a lot of things there, but something very interesting happened in that interview. It sounded like he was setting a goalpost. Kristen Welker is still with us, joining our coverage from Washington. Kristen, it sounded like he wants a ceasefire out of this meeting. He kind of went back later and said, well, actually, I'm just setting the table for the next meeting, which had been the standard line all week. But he said there a few times he wants a ceasefire, and he won't be happy if he doesn't get it coming out of this meeting.
There's no doubt, Tom, that Western officials are putting that pressure on him, that is going to be the measure in their eyes of whether this is a successful meeting. They want an unconditional ceasefire immediately. That word unconditional is so significant. If there are strings attached, if there are no ceasefire at all, this will not be viewed as a success. He also said he wants that follow-up meeting, which would have to include President Zelensky, who, of of course, has not been invited to this meeting at the request of President Putin. I had an opportunity to interview President Zelensky 3 different times, Tom. I can tell you he's adamant he is not going to cede this territory. He points to the fact this is not just a conversation about territory. It's a conversation about Ukrainian lives, the people who live in that territory. Zelensky referring to President Putin, Tom, as a terrorist in my first interview with him, and more recently, this past February, saying that he believes Putin is poised to move into other neighboring countries. And that's why the stakes here are so high, Tom. That's why you have European officials who are watching this with some consternation, with concern, because they believe this is, yes, about Ukraine. This is about Western democracies, but this is about the security, really, of all of Europe in their eyes, Tom. And that is why, from their perspective, the stakes here are so high. So again, you heard the urgency there in President Trump's voice that this is not just about this initial meeting, but trying to have a follow-on meeting as quickly as possible with President Zelensky. You talk about the optics, you talk about the reality TV commander-in-chief. For him, the gold standard, the big optic that he wants is not just standing next to President Putin, but standing next to President Putin and Zelensky. Tom.
Garrett, that was sort of a master class in studying a Trump answer.
Yeah.
He said he wants a ceasefire. He said he'll be upset if he doesn't get it after this first meeting. Then he kind of went back and said, we're just setting the table for the next meeting. Kind of hard to understand, but it feels like, again, and we're sort of interpreting here, it feels like the standard line from the White House was, we're setting the table, we're going to keep the bar low, and then Trump showing a little bit of his cards.
That's right. I mean, earlier this week, the press secretary called this entire meeting a listening exercise.
Yeah.
This was certainly more advanced than that from President Trump, suggesting that he does want to see a ceasefire, and if he doesn't get it, he would be unhappy. But what that unhappiness means, I think, is very much an interesting question, because the president has expressed this unhappiness before. He's talked about this repeatedly, that Putin keeps bombing cities and that's not good for him. His options to inflict more economic pain on Putin are extremely limited, and they would potentially inflict economic pain on Americans too. What do I mean by that? We saw him say he's going to put these extra tariffs on India to try to, punish them for buying Russian oil. Well, the only country that buys more Russian oil than India is China. Is the president willing to increase economic pressure on China at the expense of getting a deal with the Chinese on trade, on TikTok? That would be an escalation on a whole other front that I think he's been very trepidatious about going down that road.
I understand we have a little bit more from that interview. Let's play that now.
So if you were to paint a picture of what perfect looks like coming out of Alaska today, what does that look like in your mind?
Look, it's not for me to negotiate a deal for Ukraine, but I can certainly set the table to negotiate the deal. And our next meeting will have President Zelensky and President Putin and probably me. I'd like to focus on doing our country, but I get these interruptions. I've solved 6 wars in 6 months when you think about it, and that's from Pakistan to India. That was going to be a terrible one. Planes being shot down. That was getting ready to flare, and then nuclear powers, and so many others. And
Armenia, Azerbaijan, Congo, Rwanda. In fact, did you see that Hillary Clinton yesterday said that if you got this deal done and not capitulate to Putin, that she would nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize?
If President Trump were the architect of that, I'd nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, that was very nice. I may have to start liking her again.
President Trump there. To give you guys some context here, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had put out a post on social media saying that if Ukraine did not give back any land and there was peace, she would nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Garrett, of course, the former secretary, setting the bar quite high. No one thinks that Russia is going to cede all the land that they have conquered in this unjust war without getting to a peace agreement in that regard.
No, and Russia said some of it, like the Crimean Peninsula, which they took in 2014, is never going back to Ukraine. They very much see that as part of Russia. Kudos to Bret Baier, our Fox News colleague, for trying very hard to find some bar that the president will set and stick to determine whether this summit is a success or failure. The president's been very reticent to get pinned down on that. I think having learned his lesson with Putin in particular, as kind of a wily character who's probably not going to agree to anything.
Can we put the context of the 6 wars, the peace peacemaker in 6 wars. Just to walk our viewers through that. We heard the president say that.
That's right. So the president has involved himself in some of these other conflicts. Remember, there was a brief, I won't call it a war, a shooting conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, which pops off every now and again. The president used some threats of actions on trade to try to stop that. He recently held the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan at the White House to work out an agreement, and he had the leaders of Congo and Rwanda in as well. He's missing the big two, though, and I think this is the challenge for him in terms of accountability to his voters, talking about ending Israel's war in Gaza quickly and talking about ending this war between Russia and Ukraine quickly. Those are the ones he ran on, and I think those are still the big missing pieces. But this idea of the Nobel Peace Prize, you can kind of laugh it off, but this is something that the president has talked about going back to his first term, the fact that President Obama won one and that he hasn't.
And there's reporting that he's asked leaders for it to say, hey, nominate me kind of thing.
Which is, by the way, also a great way for these leaders to flatter the president as they come in and set their meetings to say, I've done this on your behalf. It is something that he cares personally about, and something that, I think is a good way to kind of get in his head about, striking these kind of deals if you're a foreign leader and wants to do
look,
so.
If there is peace in Ukraine and he is the architect and he gets that deal done, I mean, there's going to be a major argument for him to win that award. Kristen, I want to bring you back in here. It sounds like in this interview, the president has sort of laid out exactly what he wants, all of his goals. A ceasefire out of this meeting. After that, a second meeting, possibly in the United States. He did say that involving Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, he has now raised the bar pretty high, because that is going to be a tall order. I'm not saying he can't have it, he can't get it done. He might get it done, but that is going to be very difficult.
It's going to be very difficult, Tom, and that's why this is, quite frankly, the biggest test of his foreign policy yet. Remember, he campaigned on a promise to end this war within 24 hours, and now, talk about moving the goalposts, he's acknowledged that that goal has proven far more difficult than he initially thought, and it fits into this broader pattern of promises made about deals that he wants to make, and these deals proving elusive. This is one that has really divided really lawmakers here in Washington, Republicans, many who say they don't want to continue to fund this war, they don't want to continue to send U.S. military equipment to Ukraine. So there's so much riding on this deal, Tom, this real test of whether he can in fact fulfill that promise of being deal maker in chief. And you're absolutely right, he set the bar quite high in that latest interview that he conducted.
Kristen, thank you. I want to get right over to Keir Simmons. He has a bit of new reporting that is incredibly interesting. Keir, tell our viewers what you've just learned about sort of what happened on the tarmac and right after President Putin, President Trump and Vladimir Putin shook hands. What happened after that when they moved towards the vehicles?
Right, Tom, while you guys have been having that great conversation about what's being talked about now between President Trump and President Putin, we've been reporting out back, just looking at exactly what did happen when they first met on the tarmac there, and that moment when President Putin gets in the beast with President Trump and they drive off, and then you see President Putin looking out of the window, smiling and laughing. Now, Russian media has been reporting since then that there was a car for President Putin. It's called an Aurus. It was there on the tarmac, according to Russian media, waiting for him. Now, one of our great producers, Russia expert, was looking at the video herself and saw that vehicle on the tarmac, saw that Aurus. So she able to confirm simply from the video that there was a car there that should have been carrying President Putin. So two pieces of this, Tom. One, that the Russian journalists are reporting that the plan was that President Putin would take his own vehicle, and that one of our own great colleagues has seen that vehicle there. All of that will raise the question, why did President Putin get in the beast with President Trump? Was he invited by President Trump? Did he just choose to do it? Was it the plan? Was it his plan? How did he manage to get himself in that vehicle, as you guys have been talking about, for an immediate bilateral with President Trump, with, we have to assume, potentially no interpreter, no note taker, and again, meeting when President Trump and President Putin met during the first term, and there were no note takers there, and perhaps even not a US interpreter, that caused controversy. We will be talking about what happened in that car for weeks, months, maybe longer.
Here's Simmons. First, I want to get back to Richard Engel, who's live for us tonight in Ukraine, where it is getting late over there. Richard, you know, as we've mentioned, Ukraine is on the outside looking in, even though it was their country that was invaded, even though it is their country that is trying to fend off Russia. My question to you is, if President Trump is successful, if he gets that second meeting with Putin and Trump, will Zelensky attend that as well?
100%. President Zelensky has been pushing for a summit with Vladimir Putin, a summit that could be organized by the United States. Just a short while ago, President Zelensky said that he would attend another summit if it were held. So this is something that Ukraine absolutely wants. They would rather be there right now, and they're worried about the table being set before they can arrive and deals being made before they are in the room. But yes, they would certainly go.
Okay, Richard Engel for us. I want to get right back over to Peter Alexander, who's inside where that news conference is going to take place later tonight. Peter, walk our viewers through what's going to happen over the next hour or 2 hours or so.
Yeah, Tom, so as we expect, there's going to be more of this bilateral meeting, a 3-on-3 between the leaders on both sides, Trump, Putin, and some of their top deputies, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio for the U.S., Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister on the Russian side, before they have an expanded bilateral meeting. A wider group of individuals will be there. And Donald Trump had said that he'll know within the first couple of minutes if Vladimir Putin was open to doing a deal here, a deal toward peace. It appears clear that Vladimir Putin is open to dealing, whether it's on the topic of peace is unclear, as evidenced by those he's bringing into the room with him for that expanded bilateral. One of those who won't be there is the negotiator on the Russian side as it relates to the war in Ukraine. Tom, certainly some others will be there on the topic of the economy. Here we are.